purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony on President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas' open border policies and how these failed policies have had profound and devastating impact throughout the country. This is the first hearing in this committee's impeachment proceedings regarding Secretary Mayorkas. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning. Today is a solemn occasion as this committee begins official impeachment proceedings in the matter of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and his handling of America's borders since taking office in February 2021. I wish we weren't sitting here today. I wish these proceedings were not necessary. I wish our southwest border was secure. I wish that our government was enforcing the laws passed by the Congress and doing its job to keep the American people safe. Unfortunately, Secretary Mayorkas has done none of these things. For almost a year, the House Committee on Homeland Security has conducted a comprehensive investigation into the causes, costs, and consequences of the unprecedented crisis at our southwest border. Our evidence makes it clear. Secretary Mayorkas is the architect of the devastation that we have witnessed for nearly 3 years. The findings of our investigation, available to the public at homeland.house.gov, coupled with the Secretary's refusal to change course on the reckless decisions facilitating this crisis, have left us with no reasonable alternative than to pursue the possibility of impeachment. The Secretary's actions have brought us here today, not ours. Since early 2021, we've watched in disbelief as historic numbers of inadmissible aliens have poured across our borders, both at official ports of entry and illegally crossing the thousands of miles of our borders. On Secretary Mayorkas' watch, Customs and Border Protection has recorded more than 8.1 million encounters at America's borders, including more than 6.7 million at our southwest border alone. For comparison, CBP recorded just over 3 million encounters nationwide from fiscal year 2017 to 2020. Jay Johnson, President Obama's former DHS secretary, previously said that 1,000 encounters a day, quote, overwhelms the system, end quote. On Secretary Mayorkas' watch, encounters have never averaged less than 3,000 per day, even going as high as 10 to 12,000 per day. Just a few days ago, internal CBP numbers leaked to the media showed another 302,000 encounters at the southwest border alone in December. By far an all-time record. That's nearly enough people to fill the Rose Bowl 3 times in just 1 month. In addition to these catastrophic numbers of the record 1.8 million known gotaways who've entered the country on Secretary Mayorkas' watch, individuals that Border Patrol agents know slip across our border but are not apprehended in large part because the cartels overwhelm the agents with large groups of coyote, paid, and escorted migrants. The agents see them and they count them, but they cannot apprehend them. But the numbers are most certainly far worse. As agents are moved to crossing sites to process migrants and the border is completely unmanned, there are no agents present to count the known gotaways. The number of unknown gotaways is no doubt enormous. Thousands of agents have been pulled off the front lines to process and release into our country record numbers of illegal aliens who know they will be released into the country and given a free bus or plane ticket to the city of their choice. I ask you to watch this video.
A border shutdown in El Paso, Texas, as hundreds force their way onto the Paso del Norte International Bridge.
Title 42 has officially expired. Homeland Security officials say illegal border crossings topped 10,000 per day this week, the highest levels ever.
Thousands of migrants in central Mexico continue to travel on freight trains and travel all the way to the southern border, arriving here an Eagle Pass.
Outnumbered and out-resourced, Border Patrol agents say they are struggling to keep up with this massive influx of migrants descending on our southern border.
Border Patrol clearly does not have the manpower to process the thousands of migrants here. So the situation is pretty dire.
Hundreds upon hundreds of adult men who have crossed illegally, waiting here in the Arizona sun for Border Patrol to apprehend them, and they hope be released into the United States somewhere.
Sources telling News Nation that agents have been pulled from nearby checkpoints to assist in processing the thousands of migrants crossing into Eagle Pass every day.
And this is all by design. The smugglers realize that this particular area is vulnerable.
What Americans must understand today is that these historic numbers, the chaos you just saw on the screen, are the result of a much deeper problem. And that problem is not instability in other countries. It's not poverty. It's not climate change. It's not supposedly broken immigration system. All of these excuses have long predated Secretary Mayorkas' tenure, and yet we've never experienced a crisis like this. As even the New York Times admits, and I quote, push factors don't explain the entire surge, and maybe not even most of it. There have been no recent wars in Latin America, and the region's poverty rate has been flat, end quote, the New York Times. I'll also note that 2 of the 16 cities in the world with the highest murder rates are right here in the United States. No, this crisis has been intentional. Secretary Mayorkas was made aware of testimony given by President Biden's Attorney General Merrick Garland, where the AG admitted the current policies are being exploited by the cartels. Yet Secretary Mayorkas turns around and implements additional policies to expand the catch and release measures, empowering the cartels and killing Americans. After nearly 3 years of watching this unfold, what other conclusion is there but this is an intentional crisis? Secretary Mayorkas has brazenly refused to enforce the laws passed by Congress and enacted policies that knowingly make our country less safe. What we're seeing here is a willful violation of his oath of office taken by Secretary Mayorkas. Let me repeat that, a willful violation. Secretary Mayorkas has used mass parole to release more than 1.5 million inadmissible aliens into the country, despite the Immigration and Nationality Act stating that parole is to be used only as an, I quote, case-by-case, end quote, and, quote, temporary basis for a, quote, significant benefit or urgent humanitarian reason, end quote. The chief patrol agent of the Border Patrol's Laredo sector told us last June that historically parole, and I quote, was used only in extreme humanitarian instances. If a child was sick, had to go to the hospital, we'd parole the parent or something like that. But that was very rare. It wasn't an everyday thing, end quote. This Border Chief is right. The scale of Secretary Mayorkas' mass use and abuse of parole is unprecedented and has been declared inconsistent with the laws passed by Congress by multiple federal judges, but remains a central component of Secretary's agenda. The Immigration and Nationality Act also requires that illegal aliens apprehended crossing the border be detained pending their removal proceedings. Secretary Mayorkas has ignored this law. In fiscal year 2013, according to DHS's own numbers, the Obama administration detained 82% of illegal aliens from the moment they were encountered until their case was decided, and another 9% were held for at least some portion of time after that. That's a pretty good track record, and under a Democrat administration. In Secretary Mayorkas' first year on the job, that 82% number dropped to just 10%. Illegal aliens not detained at all jumped from 9% to 64% in FY21. In a court opinion earlier this year, federal judge Kent Wetherell wrote, and I quote, "The evidence establishes that in late January or early February of 2021, DHS made a discrete change in detention policy from release only if there is a compelling reason to release unless there is a compelling reason not to," end quote. The deputy chief of the Border Patrol's Yuma sector told our committee in September, quote, "The belief that they are going to be released with no consequences is certainly something that many migrants tell our agents," end quote. On Secretary Mayorkas' watch, that's a pretty good bet. And under his leadership, individuals guilty of violent crimes and even some of on the terrorist watch list have been released into this country. Just Monday, multiple sources confirmed Secretary Mayorkas admitted that released rates of illegal aliens are currently around 85%. All told, DHS numbers indicate that well over 3 million inadmissible aliens have been released into our country on Secretary Mayorkas' watch. Factor in the 1.8 million known gotaways, the unqualifiable unknown gotaways, that's roughly the population of the state of South Carolina. Not only has Secretary Mayorkas refused to detain these individuals in accordance with the law, but he has also made it nearly impossible for Immigration and Customs Enforcement to remove them. His policies have largely restricted the ability of ICE to detain and remove the population of illegal aliens. ICE removals dropped from more than 267,000 in FY19 to less than 60,000 in FY21 and 70,000 in 22. The FY23 numbers were better, but were still more than 40,000 fewer than the lowest year of the last administration, which largely occurred in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Criminals as a percentage of all ICE arrests went from around 90% in FY 2020 to just 43% in FY 23. The Secretary is not even living up to his own flawed standards that supposedly prioritize threats to public safety. The former sector chief in San Diego told us in May of 2023 that he didn't think the consequences of being removed from the country was being utilized enough to deter illegal immigration. Even Texas Democrat Mr. Cuellar has said, and I quote, "If you don't detain people, if you don't send people back, then the border becomes a speed bump," end quote. On top of all this, upon entering office, Secretary Mayorkas immediately began dismantling effective policies that had secured the southwest border, despite being warned by experienced border security personnel of the consequences that would result. That, coupled with his consistent decision to double down on his own unlawful policies, indicates an intentionality to this crisis. And I must note with great emphasis, these are not simple policy differences. This is a years-long pattern of refusing to enforce the laws passed by Congress. Our investigation also uncovered the fact that Secretary Mayorkas has violated the authority of his office. Secretary Mayorkas has directed the department to create numerous new unlawful mass parole programs that have allowed an unprecedented number of individuals to enter our country who otherwise would have no lawful basis to be here, and to incentivize migrants to make the dangerous and sometimes deadly travel to our southern border. He has also effectively told ICE officers not to do their job in enforcing America's immigration laws. According to his own guidance to ICE, and I quote, "The fact an individual is removable should not alone be the basis of an enforcement action against them," end quote. And quote, "Our personnel should not rely on the fact of conviction," end quote, "for a flatly deportable crime, but must consider," quote, "mitigating factors that ameliorate in favor of declining enforcement action," end quote. He has even overseen the reckless and irresponsible use of federal law enforcement personnel to sweep under the rug the mess he's made at the southwest border. Border Patrol agents from the northern border have been deployed to the southwest border to assist in processing and releasing illegal aliens into the interior. Hundreds of law enforcement professionals from Homeland Security investigations have been pulled from serious investigations like sex crimes, child exploitation, and other atrocities to perform administrative functions at the border. One whistleblower claimed that his team was told to shut down its investigations and were then sent to the border to make sandwiches. The Secretary has abused his authority and put Americans at risk. Secretary Mayorkas has repeatedly lied to the American people and to the United States Congress. Our investigation uncovered more than 100 instances where Secretary Mayorkas misled the public. Notably, he claimed in April 2022 hearing to have operational control of the southwest border as defined by federal statute. This was false. He then told another lie by claiming in subsequent hearings that he does not use the statutory definition of operational control, despite doing so in that 2022 hearing. Watch for yourself.
Will you testify under oath right now? Do we have operational control, yes or no?
Yes, we do. And
we have operational control of the borders.
Yes, we do. And Congressman, we are working to...
What's the word operational control defined? In this section, the term operational control means the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. Do you stand by your testimony that we have operational control in light of this definition?
And Congressman, I think the Secretary of Homeland Security would have said the same thing in 2020 and in 2019.
That's the definition of
Based
operational
upon the
control.
definition you have, sir, up there, no.
We don't have operational control.
No, sir.
With respect to the definition of operational control, I do not use the definition that appears in the Secure Fence Act.
Do you admit that your policies have led the country farther away from operational control of the border as defined by the Congress?
Congressman, no, I do not.
If you will recall when you testified here in front of me when I asked that question, when you very clearly stated we do have operational control, when presented with the actual definition of operational control, you didn't hesitate. You said, I do. And you, in fact, then referred back and said, I believe that my predecessors would have said the same thing. You looked straight at the American people, straight at me, straight at every person on this committee, and said, we have operational control. Why?
Congressman, 2 points. One, you did not let me complete my answer. Two.
Hold on. Or give me your second point. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two, the Secure Fence Act defines operational control as not a single individual crosses the border.
I'm aware. I read it, and I read it to you, and you read it, and in fact, you said, I do. You didn't hesitate. You didn't say, I do. I need to explain what I mean by I do. You said, I do, over and over again.
Secretary Mayorkas told this very committee in September 2021, and I quote, the border is no less secure than it was previously, end quote. CBP recorded more than 192,000 encounters at our border that month alone, compared to around 58,000 the prior September. It was clear the border was not secure, so why did he mislead Congress? Another video, please.
Is the border more secure under your leadership than when you started?
Congressman, the border is secure. We're executing our plan, and I've been very clear and unequivocal in that regard.
Mr. Secretary, the question is the border more secure now under your leadership?
Congressman, it is no less secure than it was previously.
We have a record number of retirements, historic level of narcotics that have come across the border, and you still stand by your statement, yes or no, that the border is secure?
Yes.
He even stood at the White House podium in September 21 and falsely accused mounted Border Patrol agents in the Del Rio sector of whipping illegal aliens crossing the border. Earlier that same day, DHS emails showed that his staff had informed him that an eyewitness said no whipping occurred, yet he advanced the narrative at the highest levels anyway. One sector chief told us, and I quote, we never whipped anybody. It was never really cleared up, and that takes a toll on our agents, end quote. Please play the video.
We are very troubled by what we have seen. One cannot weaponize a horse to aggressively attack a child. We know that those images painfully conjured up the worst elements of our nation's ongoing battle against systemic racism. First of all, the images, as I expressed earlier, the images horrified us in terms of what they suggest and what they conjure up in terms of not only our nation's history, but unfortunately the fact that that page of history has not been turned entirely. And that means that there is much work to do, and we are very focused on doing it.
An email obtained through a records request reveals that DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was privately alerted by DHS officials that the whipping narrative behind the infamous horseback Border Patrol photos wasn't true. But at a press conference hours later, Mayorkas didn't stop or dispute that narrative.
This is just a taste of Secretary Mayorkas' misconduct. However, I want to close by reminding everyone that we're here today not only because House Republicans are determined to hold Secretary Mayorkas accountable, but because more than 200 House Democrats voted on November the 13th to refer articles of impeachment to our committee. We're now acting in a bipartisan way, I suppose, in taking up those very articles. And I briefly want to make it clear to the American people. Secretary Mayorkas' refusal to follow the law is sufficient grounds for impeachment proceedings. The constitutional history is overwhelmingly clear on this subject. The founders designed impeachment not just to remove officials engaged in criminal behavior, but those guilty of such gross incompetence that their conduct had endangered their fellow Americans, betrayed the public trust, or represented a neglect of duty. According to one scholar, there is, and I quote, a settled understanding beyond dispute that impeachable offenses are not limited to prosecutable crimes. Rather, the framers of the Constitution understood, and the House of Representatives has consistently concluded, that the impeachment power reaches all manner of gross misconduct in office that does serious harm to the U.S. political system, the U.S. constitutional order, or the people of the country. The actions, policies, and statements of Secretary Mayorkas easily meet the standards, end quote. Over the next few hours, you might hear a lot about process and procedure, and after a thorough year-long investigation, this committee is following the Constitution and procedure as directed by the House's vote this past November. Make no mistake, attacks on the integrity of the process are meant to distract you from the deadly consequences of our open border. Unprecedented cartel control of our southwest border with record amounts of fentanyl flooding across between ports of entry and into our communities, killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Over 300 individuals on the terrorist watch list apprehended illegally crossing the southwest border since FY 2021, compared to just 14 from FY 2017 to 2020. Families devastated by violent criminal aliens who have committed murder, rape, and assault, to say nothing of the vehicular crimes committed. CBP and ICE personnel losing faith in their mission. They and their families bearing the brunt of this onslaught at the border. The human costs of this crisis are very real. The dollar costs of this crisis have been astronomical as well. New York City alone projects that it will have to spend $12 billion dealing with the flow of illegal aliens into the city by 2025. And it is even cutting the police force to pay for it. One county in Texas had to cut salaries to afford burials and cremations of illegal aliens found dead in their jurisdiction. These costs will be felt for years to come. As I stated when we started this investigation almost a year ago, we will follow the facts. We have done just that, and the facts have led us here. I look forward to the testimonies of these distinguished attorneys general who have watched this crisis play out unabated in their states. For the sake of our homeland security and the well-being of the people of the United States, Secretary Mayorkas must be held accountable.